I heard my daughter screaming for help from the basement. She was crying, begging someone to save her. The voice was desperate and terrified, but when I turned to look, my daughter was standing right next to me, holding my hand. She wasn't in the basement. She was right there, looking up at me with wide, frightened eyes. I asked her if she heard it too. She nodded slowly, her little fingers squeezing my hand so tight it almost hurt. Then she whispered something that made my blood turn cold. She said, "Mommy, that's the strange thing that looks like me. It lives down there. Please don't let it come upstairs." My name is Jolene Marsh. I'm 32 years old, and I'm a single mother to my 7-year-old daughter, Bria. We moved into our house 6 months ago, right after my divorce. I thought we were starting over. I thought we were safe, but something had been living in our basement the entire time, watching us, learning us, and waiting for the right moment. Before I tell you what we found down there, make sure you subscribe to this channel and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, because what I'm about to share still keeps me awake at night. 6 months before that night, I signed the papers on our house and thought I was giving my daughter the life she deserved. My marriage to Warren had fallen apart after I found out he was cheating. The divorce was messy and painful, but I came out of it with full custody of Bria and enough money to buy us a small home in a quiet town in Ohio. The house was older, built sometime in the 1970s. It needed work, but it had good bones. 2 stories, a nice backyard for Bria to play in, and a basement that I planned to turn into a storage space one day. The price was low because it had been sitting on the market for almost a year. The previous owners had moved out suddenly, and nobody seemed to know why. I didn't ask too many questions. I just saw an opportunity and took it. My older sister Denise thought I was rushing into things. She's 38 and has always been the cautious one in our family. She kept asking me if I had done enough research on the house, if I knew the neighborhood well enough. I told her I was fine. I told her I just wanted a fresh start for me and Bria, somewhere we could build new memories without the shadow of my failed marriage hanging over us. The first few months were good. Bria adjusted to her new school and made a few friends. I settled into my routine, working night shifts at the hospital 3 days a week while Denise came over to stay with Bria. Life felt normal for the first time in a long time. I was tired, but happy. I finally felt like I was in control of my own life again. But then Bria started talking about the other girl. It began small. She would mention a new friend who came to visit her sometimes. I assumed it was an imaginary friend, which is completely normal for kids her age. I even thought it was sweet. Bria was an only child, and I figured she was just creating a companion to play with when she felt lonely. Then the details got stranger. Bria said the friend looked exactly like her. Same hair, same face, same clothes. She said the friend didn't blink very much and smiled in a way that felt wrong. She said the friend asked her questions, like what time does mommy come home from work, and where does mommy keep the extra keys? I laughed it off. I told myself Bria just had a vivid imagination. 2 weeks before everything happened, I found muddy footprints in the hallway. They started at the basement door and led all the way to Bria's bedroom. When I asked Bria if she had gone into the basement, she promised me she hadn't. She looked scared when she said it. I didn't believe her. I thought she was just trying to avoid getting in trouble for going somewhere I told her not to go. I cleaned up the footprints and forgot about them. I wish I hadn't. I wish I had asked more questions. I wish I had gone down to that basement and looked around. But I was busy, and I was tired, and I convinced myself it was nothing. That was my biggest mistake. The night everything changed was a Saturday in late October. I had the weekend off, which was rare, and I wanted to spend quality time with Bria. We made popcorn and picked out a movie to watch together. It was supposed to be a perfect, normal night, just a mother and daughter enjoying each other's company in their safe little home. But our home was never safe, and we were never alone. We were about halfway through the movie when I heard it. A scream coming from somewhere below us. It was a child's voice, high and desperate, crying out for help. The words were clear. "Daddy, help me! Please, Daddy, help!" The voice sounded exactly like Bria. The same pitch, the same tone, the same way she says certain words. For a split second, my brain couldn't process what was happening, because my daughter was sitting right next to me on the couch. I looked at Bria, and she was frozen. Her eyes were huge, and her face had gone completely pale. She was staring at the floor like she could see through it, down to wherever that sound was coming from. I asked her if she heard that. She nodded slowly without looking at me. Her whole body was stiff, like she was too scared to move. The screaming continued. "Daddy, please, I'm scared. Help me, Daddy." It was coming from the basement. There was no doubt about it. The sound was muffled by the floor, but it was definitely coming from below us, from behind that door in the kitchen that I always kept closed. I didn't understand why the voice was calling for Daddy. Warren hadn't been part of our lives for over a year. He moved to another state after the divorce and barely even called Bria on her birthday. There was no reason for anyone in this house to be calling for him. It didn't make sense, and that made it even more terrifying. I asked Bria who was down there. She finally looked up at me, and I will never forget the expression on her face. She looked like she had been carrying a terrible secret for a long time and was finally ready to tell me. She whispered that it was the thing that looks like her. She said it lives in the basement and comes upstairs sometimes when I'm not home. She said it pretends to be her friend, but it's not really a friend. It asks too many questions and smiles wrong and never blinks the way normal people do. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I wanted to believe Bria was making this up, that her imagination had run wild because of the scary sounds, but the fear in her eyes was real. This wasn't a game to her. She was genuinely terrified. I asked Bria why she never told me about this before. She said she tried, but I didn't believe her. She said every time she talked about the other girl, I told her it was just imaginary. She thought I would get mad if she kept bringing it up, so she stopped talking about it. But the thing never stopped coming. It visited her at least once a week, always when I was at work, always when Aunt Denise was busy in another room. The screaming from the basement suddenly stopped. The silence was almost worse than the noise. I sat there on the couch, holding Bria close to me, straining my ears to hear anything else. For a few seconds, there was nothing, just the sound of the movie still playing on the TV, cheerful cartoon voices that felt completely wrong against the terror filling our living room. Then I heard footsteps. They were coming from the basement stairs, slow, heavy footsteps, one at a time, climbing up toward the door. I counted them in my head without meaning to. 1, 2, 3, 4. Each step felt like it took forever. Each step brought whatever was down there closer to us. Bria buried her face against my arm. She was shaking so hard I could feel it through my whole body. She whispered, "Please don't let it get me, Mommy. Please." I had never heard my daughter sound so small and so scared. It broke something inside me. I was supposed to protect her. I was supposed to keep her safe. And something had been living in our house, terrorizing her for months, and I had no idea. The footsteps reached the top of the stairs. Then the basement door handle started to turn, slowly, like whoever was on the other side wanted us to see it moving, wanted us to know they were coming. I watched that handle twist, and I knew I had only seconds to make a decision that could save our lives or end them. I didn't wait to see what was going to come through that door. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to get my daughter out of that house immediately. I grabbed Bria and lifted her off the couch, holding her tight against my chest. She wrapped her arms around my neck and her legs around my waist, clinging to me like she would never let go. I ran toward the front door without looking back. My phone was in the kitchen. My keys were on the counter right next to the basement door. I couldn't go back for them. Whatever was behind that door was between me and everything I needed to call for help or drive away. So I left it all behind. I chose my daughter over everything else, and I would make that same choice 1,000 times over. I yanked open the front door and ran outside into the cold October night. The air hit my face, and I realized I wasn't wearing shoes. Neither was Bria. We were both in our pajamas, completely unprepared to be outside, but I didn't care. I ran across our front yard and headed straight for the neighbor's house, a small brick home where an older man named Mr. Holloway lived. I had only spoken to him a few times since we moved in, but he seemed kind, and I was desperate. I pounded on his door with one hand while holding Bria with the other. I was yelling for him to open up, to please help us. It felt like forever before I saw the porch light turn on. The door opened, and Mr. Holloway stood there in his robe, looking confused and concerned. He asked me what was wrong, and I could barely get the words out. I told him someone was in my house. I told him I needed him to call the police right now. He didn't ask questions. He just stepped aside and let us in, then went straight to his phone and dialed 911. I stood in his living room holding Bria, both of us shaking from cold and fear. Bria hadn't said a single word since we left the house. She just kept her face pressed against my shoulder, her small body trembling against mine. While Mr. Holloway talked to the 911 operator, I asked if I could use his phone next. I needed to call my sister. Denise picked up on the second ring, and I told her everything as fast as I could. I said someone was living in our basement. I said they had been coming upstairs and talking to Bria. I said we were at the neighbor's house waiting for the police. Denise didn't waste time asking for details. She just said she was getting in her car right now and would be there in 15 minutes. The police arrived before Denise did. 2 officers pulled up in front of my house, and I watched from Mr. Holloway's window as they approached the front door. One of them came over to talk to me first. He asked me to describe what happened, and I told him about the screaming, the voice that sounded like my daughter, the footsteps on the basement stairs, the door handle turning. He listened carefully and wrote everything down. Then he and his partner went inside to search the house. Those next 10 minutes were the longest of my life. I stood at the window, holding Bria, watching the flashlight beams move past the windows of my home. I didn't know what they would find. I didn't know if someone would come running out. I didn't know if the officers were safe in there, or if something terrible was about to happen. Denise arrived and came rushing into Mr. Holloway's house. She took one look at me and Bria and pulled us both into a hug. She kept saying it was going to be okay, that the police were handling it, that we were safe now. I wanted to believe her, but I couldn't relax. Not until I knew what was in that basement. Finally, one of the officers came out of my house and walked over to Mr. Holloway's porch. He knocked on the door, and when I opened it, I could tell from his face that something was very wrong. He said they didn't find a person inside, but he said they found something in the basement that I needed to see. I didn't want to go back inside that house. Every part of me wanted to stay right where I was, holding my daughter, safe in my neighbor's living room. But the officer said it was important. He said I needed to see what they found so I could help them understand what was going on. Denise offered to stay with Bria, and I kissed my daughter on the forehead and promised her I would be right back. She didn't want to let go of me, but Denise gently pulled her into her arms and held her close. I walked across the yard with the officer, my bare feet cold against the grass. The front door of my house was wide open, and lights were on in every room. It looked so normal from the outside, just a regular house in a regular neighborhood. But I knew now that it had never been normal. Something had been hiding inside it the whole time. The officer led me through the kitchen to the basement door. It was open now, and I could see the wooden stairs leading down into the darkness below. Another officer was already down there, and I could see the glow of his flashlight moving around. I took a deep breath and followed the first officer down the stairs, gripping the railing so tight my knuckles turned white. The basement was unfinished, just concrete floors and exposed pipes and old boxes I hadn't unpacked yet. But the officer led me to the far corner, behind the water heater, where I had never really looked before. There was a section of the wall that looked slightly different from the rest. The officer pushed on it, and it swung open like a door. It was a hidden room. Someone had built a false wall to create a secret space, and I had never known it existed. What I saw inside that room made me feel like I was going to be sick. There was a small mattress on the floor with dirty blankets piled on top. There were empty cans of food stacked in one corner, dozens of them, like someone had been eating down here for months. There were bottles of water, some empty and some half full, and on the walls, there were drawings, children's drawings, or at least drawings made to look like a child had created them. But something about them was wrong. The lines were too controlled, too deliberate, An adult had made these, trying to copy the way a little kid would draw. The drawings were all of the same thing, a little girl with brown hair, just like Bria. Some of the drawings showed the girl playing in a backyard that looked exactly like ours. Some showed her sleeping in a bed that looked exactly like Bria's bed. And some of the drawings had words written on them in messy handwriting. The words said things like, "I want to be her, and she has everything I deserve, and soon it will be my turn." But the worst part was the photographs. There was a whole collection of them pinned to one section of the wall. They were all pictures of Bria, pictures of her walking to school, pictures of her playing in our backyard, pictures of her through the window of her bedroom. Someone had been watching my daughter for months, following her, photographing her without either of us knowing. The officer told me they found identification in the room. The person living in my basement was a woman named Candace Vreen. She was 29 years old, and she had been reported missing from a psychiatric facility about 3 months ago. She had a history of obsessive behavior and delusions. The police believed she had been living in my basement for at least 4 months, which meant she was already down there when we moved in. The officer explained that Candace had been studying my daughter. She listened through the walls and floors, learning how Bria talked, how she sounded when she was scared or happy or sad. She practiced copying Bria's voice. The screaming I heard calling for Daddy was Candace, using what she had learned to try to lure someone down to the basement. She had heard Bria talking about missing her father and thought that word would work. The police found Candace hiding in the crawl space under our back porch. She had escaped there when she heard us leave the house. When they pulled her out, she was wearing the exact same pajamas that Bria had worn the day before. The same pink pants, the same shirt with little stars on it. She had been planning something terrible, and we got out just in time. Candace Vreen was arrested that night and taken back into psychiatric custody with additional criminal charges filed against her. The police told me she would be facing charges for stalking, breaking and entering, child endangerment, and illegal surveillance. The district attorney said her case was one of the most disturbing examples of obsessive behavior they had seen in years. Candace had no history of violence before this, but her fixation on my daughter had been escalating for months. The officers who interviewed her said she genuinely believed she was supposed to replace Bria. She thought if she studied my daughter long enough and learned everything about her, she could somehow become her. The doctors at the psychiatric facility said her delusions had gotten worse after she stopped taking her medication, and she had escaped specifically to find a child she could attach herself to. The investigation revealed how she had been getting into our house. There was an old cellar door on the side of the basement that led outside. It was hidden behind overgrown bushes, and I had never even noticed it was there. The previous owners must have known about it, and I started to wonder if that was the real reason they moved out so suddenly. Candace had discovered the door and used it to come and go whenever she wanted. She moved in before we did, hiding in that secret room behind the false wall, waiting to see who would buy the house. When she saw Bria, something in her broken mind decided my daughter was the one she wanted to become. I couldn't stop thinking about all the times Candace had been inside our home without me knowing. She had gone through our things. She had watched us eat dinner. She had stood outside Bria's bedroom door while my daughter slept. Every memory I had of our first 6 months in that house was now contaminated by the knowledge that we were never alone. Every time I thought Bria and I were having a private moment together, Candace might have been listening from below, learning, planning, waiting. Bria struggled for a long time after that night. She had nightmares almost every night for weeks. She would wake up screaming, convinced that the other girl was standing in her room. She refused to be alone anywhere in the house, even the bathroom. I took her to see a child therapist who specialized in trauma, and slowly, week by week, my daughter started to heal, but she was never quite the same. She lost some of that carefree innocence that children are supposed to have. She learned too young that the world can be dangerous and that monsters are real. They just don't look the way you expect them to. I sold the house 2 months later. I couldn't live there anymore, and I couldn't ask Bria to either. Every time I walked past the basement door, I felt sick. Every creak of the floorboards made me jump. The home that was supposed to be our fresh start had become a place of nightmares. We moved into an apartment closer to Denise. It was smaller and more expensive, but it had no basement. That was the only thing I cared about. Denise became an even bigger part of our lives after that. She helped me find the apartment, helped us move, helped Bria feel safe again. I don't know what I would have done without her. She never once said I told you so about the house, even though she had every right to. She just showed up and took care of us when we needed it most. I learned something important from this experience. I learned to listen to my daughter. When Bria told me about the strange girl who looked like her, I dismissed it as imagination. When she said the girl asked weird questions and smiled wrong, I told her it wasn't real, but it was real. My daughter was trying to warn me for months, and I didn't take her seriously. Children notice things that adults overlook. They sense when something is wrong, even if they can't explain it properly. If your child tells you something is scaring them, listen. Really listen, because they might be seeing something you're missing. I still think about Candace sometimes. I wonder what would have happened if we hadn't heard her that night. I wonder how much longer she would have waited before making her move. The identical pajamas she was wearing when the police found her haunt me. She was ready for something. She was building towards something. And I am grateful every single day that we got out before I had to find out what it was. My daughter is safe now. She smiles more than she used to. She sleeps through the night most of the time. We built a new life in our little apartment, and we're okay. But I never forget how close I came to losing her. I never forget that there was a woman living beneath our feet who wanted to steal my daughter's identity, her life, her place in this world. If something feels wrong in your home, trust that feeling. If your child tells you they're scared of something, believe them. Don't wait until it's almost too late like I did. If this story made you want to hold your loved ones a little closer tonight, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. And drop a comment below telling me, have you ever had a gut feeling that something was wrong in your home? I want to hear your stories, and you never know who might need to hear them too.